Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Joe, Mathieu in Washington, thanks for being here on Bloomberg TV and radio with news coming from the White House today on Russia. If you were with us a short time ago, you heard the president on Truth Social talking about the meeting that took place a short time ago with Vladimir Putin. President Trump sent his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, to Moscow. There was a 3-hour-long conversation, the president framing it as productive, but it's very difficult to tell if anything significant will come from this session, knowing that only 2 days from now will be the deadline for secondary sanctions on Russia over its war against Ukraine. We're going to have more with our political panel on this. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us, but let's start live at the White House. Bloomberg Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall has the latest on this. Tyler, what else are we learning, and when could we hear an announcement if there is one?
Yeah, hey, Joe. Well, as you mentioned, we really just heard from President Trump moments ago saying that this meeting did make progress, but we haven't really seen many tangible deliverables beyond that, and that President Trump said that he briefed our European allies on these discussions as Steve Witkoff wraps up really what's his 5th round of negotiations with Vladimir Putin in Moscow ahead of this Friday, August 8th deadline for Russia to come to the negotiating table in perhaps a more meaningful way or face further economic penalties. And we did see the White House take at least the first step in making good on that threat earlier when President Trump imposed that 25% additional tariff on India over its imports of Russian energy supplies. About 37% of Russian oil ends up getting exported to India, so they are one of those top consumers, and this was something that we had long heard from President Trump, and it appears that he has taken this step, though that additional tariff will not go into effect for another 21 days. And it appears that could really just be the first blow in this pressure campaign, Joe, because we have a headline crossing on the terminal earlier this hour. People familiar telling us that the White House is considering new sanctions on Russia's covert fleet of oil tankers. That appears to be the next target in what has become this pressure campaign to try to get some more meaningful concessions from Vladimir Putin. And Joe, as you know, we had some pretty incredible reporting this morning that Russia might be willing to potentially suggest there be an air truce. To be sure, Vladimir Putin, the understanding is he's not going to go for a full ceasefire, but perhaps they would put on the table an air truce. So think stopping missile strikes or drone strikes that happen in the air to try to stave off some of these economic penalties.
Tell us about the Swiss, Tyler. The Swiss president got on an airplane without a formal invitation to come to Washington to renegotiate what the president deemed to be a 39% tariff. The president did sit down with the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who put on social media a picture of the two of them discussing the importance, he says, of a fair and balanced trade relationship between the U.S. and Switzerland, reaffirming our commitment to stronger bilateral defense cooperation, but no lower tariff. It seems the Swiss will go home empty-handed.
Right, and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, has a lot of roles in this administration, but he doesn't lead the bilateral trade talks, right? So, I mean, our reporting indicates that the Swiss president did come to Washington without a formal invite from this White House, but that just really shows the pressure that the government is under to try to get a lower tariff rate ahead of tomorrow's deadline of this 39% rate ultimately going into effect. And it's been really interesting to see how these talks really did seem to go off the rails here, considering our reporting had indicated that there had been positive momentum. Now, a person familiar does tell Bloomberg News it appears the Swiss president is leaving Washington without a deal, despite putting on the table a new proposal for the U.S., but it apparently was not enough. There was a few different threads that we were watching here, Joe, but important context that the Swiss really don't have tariffs on their imports. Only about 5% of their imports are tariffs, and that's really around agricultural products, which does appear to be a red line in those negotiations. We know the U.S. would like to, of course, see greater market access for U.S. agricultural goods, but there were other places where we thought perhaps there could be some agreement, such as boosting U.S. LNG purchases, boosting pharmaceutical purchases, something that we know is top of mind for this administration. And then one that I'll leave you with that we didn't hear much of an update about, but we know that the government is negotiating some purchases of some Lockheed Martin fighter jets, and some of the reporting indicated that perhaps there could be a higher purchase price for that. But at this moment, it doesn't appear that any of the efforts were enough ultimately to get this White House to budge.
Tyler Kendall, full of news today. Thank you so much, Tyler, with the update live from the White House. As we mentioned, President Trump on Truth Social earlier talking about Steve Witkoff's meeting today with Vladimir Putin. He didn't have a lot to say, but he did call it a highly productive meeting. Great progress was made, says the president. Afterwards, I updated some of our European allies. We want to play it to our political panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, Bloomberg Politics contributors, are with us. Jeannie is Senior Democracy Fellow with the Center for the Presidency, the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Rick is partner at Stone Court Capital, our Republican strategist. How does this feel to you this time, Jeannie? There have been a lot of meetings and a lot of hours spent with Steve Witkoff and Vladimir Putin that have resulted in absolutely nothing. With 2 days to go here, will we hear about a deal? Marco Rubio telling CNN we could hear an announcement within days.
Yeah, the White House is certainly heightening expectations, as you and Tyler were just talking about. But, it's hard to imagine. Hopefully there is a deal, but what would this look like? I mean, Russia is winning on the battlefield. They have the advantage in terms of population. They have the advantage in terms of arms. The president is talking about these secondary sanctions, secondary tariffs, and indeed putting them on India, despite the fact that the EU buys a substantial amount of energy from Russia as well. So I'm not sure exactly what this will look like, but it's hard to imagine that Vladimir Putin changes what he has been asking for so far, because one thing he has been is very, very consistent on his demands.
Mm-hmm. Rick, the language coming from the Kremlin is really something. On our part in particular, said a foreign policy aide to Vladimir Putin, some signals were conveyed on the Ukrainian issue. Corresponding signals were also received from President Trump. How do we read into this?
Not a great meeting if you're looking for a ceasefire. Look, I mean, Vladimir Putin sure has done exactly what Jeannie said. He hasn't changed his tune since day one on this thing. But the reality is it has thrust Donald Trump into the waiting arms of President Zelensky. I mean, the difference now is that the U.S. and Zelensky are unified. The U.S. and Europe are unified. There are efforts now to rearm Zelensky. There are efforts now to spend more of U.S. taxpayer dollars on Ukraine coming from the Hill. Mm-hmm. It's a complete change of positions than when Donald Trump took office in the first 60 days of his administration. And so good job, Vlad. You've actually done something that nobody thought could happen, and that is that Donald Trump is now the biggest supporter of the Ukraine. And with that, a unified Western approach, and he can't resist that. Ultimately, he will fail if the U.S., Europe, and Ukraine are aligned.
Wow. It is something, Jeannie, the evolution that we've seen here. Donald Trump now referring to the Russian war machine in multiple social media posts, including his idea to add a 25% tariff on India. How long can we assume Donald Trump will see the world this way?
It's hard to assume. I try not to with Donald Trump. Anything can happen. But, let's just think this through. So he imposes this tariff on India to 50% for buying Russian oil, which the United States countenanced not that long ago because it's capped. And India sent out a pretty fervent and strong message saying the U.S. and the Europeans are being hypocritical because the Europeans are the second largest importer of LNG from Russia. And they also are talking about looking to different partners. And so what that does in terms of the BRICS and everything else is one question. The other thing is, what are we going to do? Get in a frozen conflict with Russia at this point? Because there's two ways to end a war. You negotiate it out, or you arm. And listening to Rick, I think he's right. We may see the United States arming Ukraine, but the Ukraine has a big, big problem, which is population. It simply doesn't have the numbers to win. Now, is Europe and the United States going to go in with them? So I'm not sure how this gets us anywhere further than a frozen conflict with Russia, while we need to be competing with China, not to mention everything going on in the Middle East. I think Donald Trump was right instinctually when he came to office, and now he is looking very much like Joe Biden when it pertains to this conflict with the Ukraine.
He spoke to Volodymyr Zelensky today, and the president of Ukraine is speaking about that phone call. Apparently, European leaders were on the call with President Trump. Pretty remarkable. Right on my way from our brigades here, I spoke with President Trump, Zelensky writes on social media. This conversation happened after President Trump's representative, Steve Witkoff, visited Moscow. There's reporting, Rick, on the Bloomberg today that the U.S. is now also considering sanctions on Moscow's covert fleet of oil tankers, the shadow fleet, as it's called, and entities that enable them to operate. How come none of this has happened until now? We spent years in the Biden administration asking if we had done everything possible, if there were more sanctions to find, and it appears there were a lot more.
Well, we talked about that at the time, and we used to make a very clear statement that Joe Biden was trying to eke out a win, and you don't eke out a win when you're challenging Vladimir Putin. The entire approach that Joe Biden's administration took was do as little as you can for as long as you can and hope this all just goes away. And that includes the readiness for that administration to give arms to Ukraine, and also why you would not have hit Russia on day one with massive tariffs and basically roadblock their ability to sell hydrocarbons to the world. I mean, none of it made any sense at the time. We criticized the Biden administration for that. And honestly, I mean, Donald Trump is looking at others who are using Russian oil. He's commanded the Secretaries of State, Commerce, and Treasury to give him a secondary sanctions list of people who are currently aiding and abetting the Russian war machine, as he likes to put it now. And I think that will include China, but that will include other users in Europe, and they're going to have to face those penalties.
The deadline is Friday as we walk our way towards deadline day. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, great analysis, and thank you both for the insights. Bloomberg Politics contributors.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We keep our eyes on shares of Apple today. It's going to be the big story in the second half of the day with an announcement scheduled for this afternoon at the White House. Tim Cook is expected to appear alongside President Trump to make this massive investment announcement. We're talking about $100 billion in domestic manufacturing. When we talk Apple, we have to talk to Ed Ludlow, the host of Bloomberg Tech, with his eyes on Washington. Once again, this is getting to be a habit, Ed. Is this new money that we're learning from Apple?
Well, the $100 billion is new. It's in addition to and on top of the $500 billion that Apple had already announced or disclosed they plan to invest in the United States in the context of manufacturing, but also direct investments into suppliers and training. But there's a heavier emphasis, Joe, on already disclosed. So in aggregate, it's a bigger number. But you have to ask questions of the what next, particularly around the president and the administration's, motivation. This is a great win for them. But Apple is not sort of saying, let's start building the iPhone in America. They're absolutely not saying that. What they're saying is, here's our existing supply base in America. We're going to support those suppliers to do more. And we're going to invest in training and ramp up on some already announced projects. Okay.
What does Apple make in America?
Yeah, it's a really good question because it's the only question. The $500 billion that came before this new $100 billion was targeted quite specifically at a facility, for example, that made servers. Apple, like most technology companies, has its own big computer footprint. When I say computer, I mean data center on premises, and they make their own servers, and that was part of it. They have key suppliers here. Glass is one of them. Some electronics as well. they reinvest those, and then they have a workforce. And so like a lot of that investment was skilled workforce. They make Mac components here. But Bloomberg's reported, like before all of this happened at the turn of the year with the new administration, Apple was also looking at some of what it manufactures in America and thinking, can I do that in Asia? Ironically, paradoxically.
Yeah.
This is the thing. Will Apple manufacture the iPhone in the United States? There is absolutely no suggestion that the news today indicates that at all.
Really interesting. What do we know about Donald Trump's relationship with Tim Cook these days? Are they getting along?
Yeah, don't laugh at me when I repeat this line, because I know I've used it a bit on this program recently. But President Trump's best buddy right now is NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang. He's kind of been the public poster child of what's happening with technology in America and the re-onshoring of industry. And NVIDIA's there with Apple, right, around the same level, $500 billion. The president has much more directly called out Tim Cook in a with negative connotations. You know, the threat has been if Apple does not shift specifically iPhone production, but more manufacturing and assembling to this country, they will face a specific ad hoc heavier tariff. Now, I would note there were other media outlets that after the White House disclosed the Apple investment this morning, reported that Apple would be spared from this additional India tariff, because remember, there is some final assembled component that comes out of India for Apple, the iPhone, in smaller volume than they do in China. But yeah, the president has spoken in the public domain about Tim Cook a lot more in negative tones than any other CEO, I would say, this year. Well, Elon, maybe.
Really interesting. What does this mean for investors? Is this an event that shareholders should be paying attention to? Is it a stock mover, or this is a Washington story, Ed?
Absolutely a stock mover. You know, Apple shares are up 5.6%, biggest jump since early May. The stock in the first half of this year traded very specifically with the psychology around tariff impact and also the administration's friction. You know, we know that January through at least June, July. Actually, the stock narrative changed for Apple after that and became much more like, why aren't you doing more in AI? But a move of almost 6% in the session is very notable. This is not a move that Apple stock makes regularly on a news item like this. And, you know, one standard deviation is a 2% move. So, yeah, it's notable. And sorry to get technical with you, but I want to fully answer the question.
No, I love it. That's why we called you. Ed, it's great to see you. This announcement set for just, 3-4 hours from now. It'll coincide with the late edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Watch for Ed Ludlow, not only here from time to time on Balance of Power when we're lucky, but the host of Bloomberg Tech here on Bloomberg Television. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. Thanks for joining. We just got an update from the boss, President Trump, on Truth Social, with his eyes, of course, on the deadline for Russia at the end of this week. The deadline for secondary sanctions is Friday. President Trump writing, my special envoy, Steve Witkoff, just had a highly productive meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Great progress was made, he says. Afterwards, I updated some of our European allies. Everyone agrees, he says, this war must come to a close, and we will work towards that in the days and weeks to come. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Exclamation point. This follows a 3-hour meeting, as we told you, between Steve Witkoff and Vladimir Putin earlier today. No real readout coming from either side in terms of progress, besides what I just read to you from Donald Trump. But Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, telling CNN a short time ago that we should expect some announcements in the days ahead. So the gears are turning on this story. As we also understand, the president is adding an additional 25% tariff on goods from India, which also will have repercussions for Russia. We'll have much more on this as we work our way through the hour. And it's a real pleasure as we anticipate the announcement from Apple to bring Joe Lavorgna into the conversation. Of course, economist and counselor to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Thanks for coming over from the White House, Joe. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Joe. My pleasure.
$100 billion in domestic manufacturing is a pretty big deal. And I'd like to just get inside the process for a little bit with you, because we've heard a lot of announcements from corporate officials coming to the White House to tell stories like this. How does it begin? Does the White House reach out to a Tim Cook to talk about investments that could be made? Does Apple call the White House and say, hey, we've got a plan?
What we first start with is that we have to extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, and that was a priority of President Trump's, and Secretary Bessent spearheaded that operation. Mm-hmm. And then I think from there, it's like, okay, what can we do to build upon the success of the first administration, where President Trump had very strong non-inflationary growth. Growth was nearly 3% for the first 3 years, almost 3.5% in the third year, right before the pandemic. And then you sort of figure out, okay, how do you build the best economy possible with pro-growth incentive tax structures, cheap and abundant energy, and friendly business regulation, and you just see what happens. So,
does the White House make the outreach there? Or are you calling companies around the country saying, let's
not
talk?
My understanding. No, I think it's one of those things where, let me say this, from my own vantage point, I know that when I'm lucky enough to be in this position, people say, can I help? What can I do to help? And it could be both sides of the aisle. People really, they appreciate public service and want to help out. That's probably what happens at the corporate level, is that, okay, how can we make things better? And of course, the incentive structure is in place for companies to want to invest here. This is like with all these trade deals that the secretaries help broker. People want to bring foreign capital into the U.S., and they're incentivized to do it when the tax structure is friendly, the energy and business environment are friendly. Like it all becomes very additive. So I think it's probably a two-way street.
Yeah.
But the point is that people are making the commitment, Joe, and that's unprecedented.
Well, when we talk about reshoring, that can mean a lot of different things. There was a point at which the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, suggested that we start making iPhones here in the United States, that should in fact be possible. We just talked to Ed Ludlow before you sat down with us, and he said that's not what this is about. There are going to be different incentives when it comes to domestic manufacturing. How important is it for the White House to have Tim Cook make iPhones here in the U.S., or is that never going to happen?
What matters is high value-added manufacturing jobs, whatever that might be.
Not
and these
people turning screws into phones.
These technologies, Joe, are changing so rapidly. But, the administration really wants to have the best high growth, low inflation, high cost, a high standard of living, low cost of living
right.
society possible. And those jobs take the automobile industry, very important industry, a lot of high tech, high value added type of employment. Things related to that, that's what matters most, and that's what the administration cares about. We talk about a blue-collar wage boom.
Yeah.
You want those kind of good-paying jobs, whatever they might be,
as
to
opposed
come back.
to low-end manufacturing.
As opposed to low-end manufacturing, that's right.
Making socks here in the U.S. again. Really interesting, the spend on AI that we're seeing. A fascinating piece of information that I saw research earlier, that the CapEx from AI is actually adding more to the economy than consumer spending at the moment. A lot of this has been announced inside the White House, of course. Jensen Huang, we think of the Larry Ellison OpenAI announcement. I could just keep on going here, the money from SoftBank. Do you worry that CapEx from AI is essentially single-handedly propping up the economy here, that it's a more narrow investment than we need?
No, because first of all, the AI has been very strong. That shows up in information processing and related equipment within the GDP accounts. But industrial equipment's been strong, transportation equipment's been strong. We're talking about a CapEx comeback that's not just limited to AI. Having said that, when you have an industry that's growing as rapidly and as exponentially as it is, the math is going to be more additive than, say, the consumer side. In other words, we're looking at second derivatives. If something is a small but largely growing part of the economy, its incremental growth for a quarter or two is going to be faster. But the point is, if you get this CapEx comeback, tied in with the blue-collar boom we're seeing in wages, real wages expanding, consumer spending is going to be strong, and that's going to power the economy upward.
I want to ask you about the Fed. In fact, the president was just talking about this last evening. James, I don't know if we can spin that back right now, but I want to ask you about the search, because it's a very short list based on what the president was saying yesterday in his conversation with reporters. Let's listen to President Trump from yesterday.
Fed governor, I'll be making that decision before the end of the week, and we'll either decide on one for permanence or the 4-month period, the term. There's a term of about a number of months. We have a couple of candidates. Everybody wants it, okay? It's not a couple, but we've narrowed it to a couple of candidates. And we've also, we're looking at the Fed chair, and that's down to 4 people right now.
Down to 4. Interesting. As we spend time with Joe Lavorgna here on Balance of Power, there's a story today on the Bloomberg about the idea of a temporary Fed governor, filling the seat vacated by Governor Kugler. What would be the benefit of doing that? Is that an idea that you support instead of just going for it right now?
It would. My understanding, Joe, would be to have to be Senate confirmed.
That's right. It's going to take
so
a while.
You have to see what happens on that, and there's only so many months. So we'll see what happens. But I don't. You know, the president wants to do it. That's great. But we'll have to see then if you have to get the Senate on board. But in terms of just general people, so I know you want to ask you that. There's a really good crop of folks that could do the job.
The battle of the Kevins, it sounds like. And
the nice thing
your boss is not on the list anymore.
The nice thing, Joe, about where I sit right now, unlike my prior role, is I don't have to say who I think it's going to be. I just know whoever it will be. It'll be somebody that will be.
You're telling me Donald Trump's not going to ask you who you think should be the next?
It will be somebody good, Joe, who will have a very good relationship with the president. Yeah. And that's all.
Well,
that will matter.
Name game aside, why not just name the next chair now and have them fill that seat until it's time?
Well, I guess the issue would be that, and Secretary Bessent mentioned this before, and that is if you have like a shadow person, maybe that's not the best way to go.
Okay.
And by the way, the person may not want to have that shadow role because then you're sort of in competition with with Jay Powell at the moment.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that plays out. But I think the key point is that you're seeing the Fed now talk about the need for lower rates. You saw 2 governors dissent. That was kind of an historic event, hadn't happened over 30 years. You've seen some of the bank presidents now come out and think that rates need to be lowered.
Yeah.
So I think pretty soon everybody will be on the same page.
Why lower rates now if we still haven't gotten to 2%? That's the benchmark we talked about for the entire Biden administration. Does it need to change? Should it be 3% if you start cutting now?
So the reason, Joe, a couple-fold. Number one is that inflation's a lagging indicator. So if you're waiting for inflation to move lower, if you think the trajectory is down as we think it is, you're waiting too long, number one. Number two, the tax bill is written to increase the economy's supply potential. So that means you could have fast growth, and actually as you increase productive capacity, inflation can drop. And then the third piece is if you look at interest-sensitive areas of the economy, autos, housing, some pockets within manufacturing, those areas are soft and would benefit from lower rates. And besides, the Fed itself has rates well above where the committee believes that the neutral rate is. So I don't think inflation is the fear. In fact, if anything, as President Trump highlighted, the inflation was not going to be present with the tariffs. That's not shown up in the aggregate data. If any of the numbers have been weaker. And therefore, the Fed ought to take that into consideration.
When you're telling a growth story, though, since you've been here, you've talked about the way the economy is going to grow and the way wages are going to go up. So why would it be a sin to keep interest rates where they are for a minute to make sure that inflation doesn't start moving higher again?
Because the fundamental issue is growth. Growth does not cause inflation, Joe. And there are too many people within the economics profession that believe growth causes inflation.
This is what every mainstream economist comes on and tells us.
And they're completely wrong. That's why they've been wrong on many things, including the tariffs. As my old boss, Larry Kudlow, would say, that too many people working does not cause inflation. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon.
Wages can bring inflation.
No, not wage. No, just money and credit. Money and credit creation are what drive the inflation process, not wages, especially wages that are tied to the economy's productive capacity growing. In other words, you're starting a business, you're building a plant, you're paying those workers to build that plant to create more of the goods and services to be delivered to the populace. That's disinflationary, just as you saw, again, with President Trump's first term. Very supply-focused. President Trump had very strong growth and low and falling inflation. So this notion somehow you're going to have very good growth, you're going to have a boom, and this boom somehow is inflationary is not at all consistent with the data.
Is this Trump data now?
What's that?
Is this Trump data?
No.
It's not? It's still Biden data.
I didn't know what you meant by that.
Yeah.
No, I mean, look, here's the thing, that the one big beautiful bill was passed July 4th. Nobody thought that could be done. The president said it needed to get done. Secretary Bessent worked hard with the people on the Hill to get that done, which is a great accomplishment. You've got numerous trade deals that are really making some great progress that people didn't think was going to happen. Equity markets are strong. The outlook is very, very positive. So I think we're going to see a pretty strong economy. And people know, look at the cost of living, how much it's come down already. Yes, it's the president's economy.
It's great to spend some time with you. Don't be a stranger.
Thank you,
Come
Joe.
back and see you soon. That's Joe Livornia, of course, made his way over from the White House, counselor to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We're watching Texas once again, as always here. This has become quite the story over the past couple of weeks. You've heard it emerge right here on Balance of Power, the redistricting effort endorsed by President Trump, pursued by Republicans in Texas, now stalled by Democrats in the Lone Star State. Of course, they have fled, and if you're familiar with this program, you've probably heard from several of them, including James Talarico, who joined us before this even began to give us a sense of what we might be in for here. Democrats decided to go for it. Went to Chicago, went to Albany, went to Boston, and this thing is held up in the meantime because they have broken quorum, right? That's how this works. That's why the governor of Texas has called for their arrest. And now the feds here, by way of Senator Cornyn of Texas, Republican senator, are calling for the FBI to act and claw these Democrats back to Texas. Probably unlikely, but President Trump did address this possibility when he spoke to reporters last evening. Listen.
Well, I think they've abandoned the state. Nobody's seen anything like it, even though they've done it twice before. And in a certain way, it almost looks like they've abandoned the state. It looks very bad. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Should the FBI get involved? Should the FBI get involved?
Well, they may have to. They may have to.
They may have to. That's where we start our conversation with Ashley Davis, the Republican strategist, back with us, partner at S3 Group. Ashley, it's great to see you. This has become a national story, and we can pick away at this from a couple of different angles, because I want to ask you about what's happening in other states, potentially like Indiana, even Missouri. But to begin with Texas, you don't see the FBI going after Democrats in other states, do you?
No, I do think, though, that this is just a lot of drama. And even though there is a lot going on in August is usually a slow time. So this is even a bigger story. But listen, I think the broader point to this, Joe, is that there has been a politicalization, excuse me on that word, for the last decade in regards to redistricting. It started out in, let's just take recent history, 2018 in Pennsylvania, Republicans were blaming Democrats of being too political. North Carolina, 2020, Democrats were blaming Republicans. Remember, Eric Holder spent a decade of his life and raised over $1 billion on redistricting after he left Barack Obama. So this is just something, as a broader point, has just been too political. In regards to, in my opinion, in regards to Texas, obviously, this has happened before. I think that they left in 2021 was the most recent when Democrats did this. Listen, when there's a supermajority like there is in Texas and a Republican governor that has a lot of power, this is really their only way that they can fight back, and it's by using this mechanism. But Joe, I think this ends because of one major reason. It's not just redistricting that they're not voting on. They're not voting on the flood relief for the horrible situation that happened there just a few weeks ago. And I think at some point, after maybe a couple more days of drama, a couple more days of news headlines, that they're going to have to come back and vote on that alone, just because I think politically, and you can see it kind of popping up in the social media world right now. Yeah. They're starting to get a little bit of blowback because of the flood relief.
Although I suppose Governor Abbott could isolate this special session to flood relief and get to redistricting at another time. But of course, Democrats will probably just leave that anyway. At some point, they're going to have to get to this, and we've seen this happen before. But I want to ask you about other states. You know, everyone jumps to California and what the Democrats might do here, what Gavin Newsom might have up his sleeve. But Republicans aren't stopping in Texas here, it seems. The White House is pushing this idea on other states, including Indiana, to the extent that J.D. Vance is heading to Indianapolis to sit down with Governor Mike Braun to talk about this idea. And granted, he is there for a fundraiser for the Republican National Committee. But to what extent will Republican governors embrace this around the country?
Well, it depends not just what the governors do, but also just how much control the state legislatures or a special commission on redistricting would have in every state. So it really does depend on state by state. How it can happen. Texas is just a little bit different because of the power that the governor and the legislature has on the topic. But yes, Indiana, Missouri, two states Republicans are looking at. Democrats, obviously, you've heard it, Newsom, New York, and also in California, New York, Illinois, Minnesota, I think, is another one that I'm hearing. So listen, all gloves are off, but it's not going to be as easy in these other states as it is in Texas. And you saw what happened even today with Governor Braun saying, or maybe it was actually yesterday, where he said, listen, I'm going to have a conversation. I don't know what can happen, because he doesn't have a supermajority. So it's a little bit different.
Understood. Yeah, absolutely. Each state has its own kind of fingerprint when it comes to this story. Ashley, I want to ask you while you're with us about what's happening on Capitol Hill, or what's about to happen, maybe what's not about to happen, because you're so connected to lawmakers and their staff on the Hill. We had a bit of a breakdown between Democrats and Republicans over nominations last weekend. Everybody left town angry. There was no deal between Schumer and Thune on this, and it's leading many to believe that a government shutdown will be even more likely when lawmakers return after the August recess. Is that how you see it?
I feel that every year I hear there's going to be a shutdown, and usually 95% of the time it doesn't happen. So, but there is, I'm not ready to say that for sure, that we're going to have a shutdown. And I'm definitely not, I think we're like 50% maybe. And what I'm seeing though is just really, really bad blood in regards to Democrats and Republicans right now, because of the rescission package, because of reconciliation. And by the way, this happens every time. The Republicans and Democrats were fighting when Biden did his big two reconciliation bills when the Democrats had control. So this is very normal. I'm not real worked up about it right now, but I do think there's a broader issue. And the broader issue is what Senator Rounds has actually been talking about yesterday and today. And we have way too many people that have to get Senate confirmed. I believe in the institution of the Senate 100%. Think it's fantastic tradition. However, no matter what party it is, you spend so much time trying to get some of these positions through through the Senate floor, because of the rules of the Senate, as you know, Joe, it just takes a long time. And when you have 1,100 positions that need confirmed, it probably is not necessary. So let's walk through this just very quick. We have the Supreme Court justices, we have major judges, we have cabinet secretaries, maybe even the deputy secretary, and even I would go and give it to the general counsel of each agency. But I'm not sure if the assistant secretary of HUD needs to be Senate confirmed. Here's a perfect example, Joe. Last Trump administration, I was put up for a board appointment for the National Endowment of the Arts. It was a Senate confirmed position. There is no reason that position needs to be confirmed and take up Senate floor time. So that's what I'm saying. I think we could do some.
Well, it sounds like some procedures or maybe rules are going to be changing here, and maybe the way that they're even passed in the Senate. Ashley, it's great to have you, as always. Ashley Davis, S3 Group Republican strategist, who we learn a lot from on and off the air. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.